In this video, we begin a discussion on Chapter 16, in which we go over the labor supply, where overall in regards to this chapter, we seek to discuss the labor market, in which we'll do so by going over labor supply, then going over labor demand, such that we can put the two together and then analyze outcomes in the labor market. Where in regards to today's discussion on the labor supply, we will begin this discussion by setting up some preliminaries in order to then revisit our consumer problem and then conclude by discussing the labor supply. We're beginning with the preliminaries. Up until now, we primarily have concerned ourselves with product markets, where we examined product demand, product supply, equilibrium in product markets with varying structures, as well as government intervention in which market failure existed due to a particular market structure or due to the presence of external costs. Well, product markets are not the only class of markets that we can examine with the tools that we have developed. Factor markets also exist in which the factors of production such as labor and capital are traded, where we can use our tools to analyze such classes of markets, where for now our attention will be turned on the labor market, where in order to examine labor markets, we will need to develop our twin forces of labor supply and labor demand in order to determine the quantity of labor as well as its corresponding price. To do so, we will briefly revisit our consumer problem as well as our firm problem, where, beginning with our consumer problem, recall that our setup for consumers where they have an unlimited amount of wants in terms of purchasing goods and services and using their leisure time, but they are limited by their time and their income, where overall consumers will demand goods and services, which we spent a majority of this course exploring, and they also supply labor, which is now what we will focus our attention on. And in terms of formally stating the consumer problem, recall that this is to maximize utility subject to the budget constraints, where in our discussion of consumer choice, we examined the consumer problem in order to explain how consumers use their resource of income to purchase goods and services. Our result was product demand, where product demand is only one result from the consumer problem, which we have below, in which price is on the vertical axis, quantity of a particular good is on the horizontal axis, and we saw and derived the inverse relationship between the price of a good and quantity demanded of a good. Well, in addition to income as a scarce resource to consumers, consumers also have to consider how to use their time, where time is also a scarce resource to consumers, where, to see this, consider that there's only 24 hours in a day, such that a consumer must choose how to allocate their 24 hours each day to tasks such as sleeping, going to work, engaging in their hobbies, and hanging out with their family. But for simplicity, we'll break up how time is used for consumers in terms of the choices of labor and leisure, where we will define labor as working for a wage rate, whereas leisure will be all other activities that are not labor, where, going back to the prior slide, this then means that labor solely consists of work, and leisure consists of activities such as sleeping, hobbies, hanging out with your family, and any other miscellaneous activities. So then, with this in mind, examining the choices of labor and leisure for the consumer, in terms of labor, time allocated to labor generates an income process, where the income process from engaging in labor determines the income used for purchasing goods and services, where purchasing goods and services provides utility to the consumer in the form of consumption utility. In regards to leisure, time allocated to leisure does not generate an income process. However, time allocated to leisure does provide utility to the consumer in the form of leisure utility, where in regards to trade-offs between the choice between labor and leisure, the trade-off made for a consumer engaging in labor time is foregone utility from leisure, whereas the trade-off made for a consumer engaging in leisure time is foregone wages which cannot be then used to purchase goods and services. So then, in terms of labor time used and the consumer's income process, consumers need an income process to purchase goods and services. Thus, consumers will supply some of their time to labor for a corresponding wage rate, where the wages earned will be the price paid for labor. Where the higher the wage rate, the more consumers will supply their time for labor since they are being compensated in terms of the leisure utility that they are giving up, whereas the lower the wage rate, the less time consumers will supply for labor since the benefit that they could get from engaging in leisure exceeds that of the benefit that they are getting from their wage rate and the goods and services that they could purchase. So this then establishes that consumers supply labor. And in terms of defining the labor supply, this is going to be the willingness and ability to work specific amounts of time at alternative wage rates in a given time period, holding all else equal, where labor time supplied and wages earned are positively related. Additionally, the labor supply is going to be determined by components of the consumer problem, much like product demand was, where in terms of these determinants, this is going to be based off of the preferences consumers have in terms of leisure, the amount of wealth that they have, that is non-wage income, the wage rate that they are earning from the job that they have, expectations on future wages in terms of do they expect their future wages to increase or decrease, or do they expect to be unemployed in the future period. Additionally, what are alternative wage rates going for in similar industries that they are working in, or in alternative industries in which their skills are transferable? And lastly, how many consumers are working in an industry will also affect the supply for labor. So then, graphically, what we have then in terms of the labor supply, where price is on the vertical axis, where price for labor is going to be the wage rate earned, and quantity of labor on the horizontal axis, where quantity is going to be in terms of hours of labor worked. Given that there's a positive relationship, we'll have an upward sloping labor supply curve, in which as quantity of labor hours supplied increases, the corresponding wage rate increases as a result. However, the current story that we have for the supply of labor may not be the complete story, given that, as mentioned, a consumer allocates time to labor to generate an income process. A consumer needs an income process to purchase goods and services. Purchasing goods and services provides utility to the consumer. Additionally, a consumer can also allocate time for leisure, where time to leisure provides leisure utility, and there's a trade-off between leisure and labor in the form of consumption and leisure utility, where in terms of consumption utility, an agent only needs so much income in order to be able to fund their lifestyle. Or we could think of funding their lifestyle meaning being able to pay for their bills, food, and clothing for a particular time period, as well as for their hobbies, where after this requirement is met, further income from labor may not be as useful, such that time spent on leisure and the leisure utility gain would be preferred after this point. Or what's being described in the prior slide is that there's two effects to consider in regards to wages as opposed to just one, where initially we were just considering the substitution effect of higher wages, which generated us that positive relationship between labor hours supplied and wages earned, in that if there's an increase in the wage rate, this then corresponds to an increases in labor hours supplied, where we would think about this holding up until the point where a consumer has no income, up until where they can fulfill their lifestyle requirements, given that they need an income process and they need just enough income to be able to fulfill their lifestyle requirements. Whereas after those lifestyle requirements are fulfilled, they then get more utility from engaging their time in leisure as opposed to working more and generating an income process to get more consumption utility. After which, when this holds, we would expect the income effect of higher wages to be present, where there's an inverse relationship between wages earned and labor hours supplied, where an increase in the wage rate corresponds to a reduction in labor hours worked without losing income. Or as mentioned, we would expect this to hold when the consumer can fund their lifestyle. And so, in regards to these two effects, graphically, what this means for the labor supply curve is a backwards bending labor supply curve, where on the vertical axis we have wages earned, and on the horizontal axis we have the quantity of labor in terms of hours per week, where When a consumer initially begins supplying their time for labor, they need an income process to be able to purchase goods and services up until the point that they can fund their lifestyle. Up until this point, we would expect that the substitution effect of higher wages to be dominant and that there's a positive relationship between wages earned and labor hours supplied. When the consumer is able to fund their lifestyle, we would expect that the benefit between leisure utility and consumption utility is equal to one another. And after this point, should the consumer be able to generate additional income, the benefit that they get from consumption utility is not as high as the benefit that they get from leisure utility, such that they then begin reducing their labor hours work in order to engage in more leisure time, generating them more utility. This then allows for the income effect to be dominant in that there's an inverse relationship between wages earned and labor hours supplied, and this generates that backwards bending effect of the labor supply curve based off of can the consumer fund their lifestyle based off of their current income process. So then, with the labor supply covered, where we'll pick up in our next video is by revisiting our firm problem and deriving labor demand.